Hello, this is Mark here at Gary's Guitars in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and I'm here to talk about compression with my friend, my old friend, the Boss CS2, and this old friend, the new version of the Soul Preacher from Electro Harmonics. So let's get into it. Compression for guitars and bass, we're going to talk about mostly. Everything you hear is compressed. The sound on your phone is compressed. All the music you hear on the radio is compressed. Everything is compressed. What does compression do? Compression changes in volume into changes in intensity. So it kind of makes it a little thicker. For example, if you were to imagine a waveform, like an audio waveform, we've all seen those. It kind of looks like peaks and valleys. If you were to apply a good deal of compression to it, it would look more like Bart Simpson's hairdo. It would be thick in the middle with not a lot of peaks and not a lot of valleys. This changes the sound, but it changes it in a way that's kind of subtle compared to other effects. Like you put on a chorus or you put on a big reverb and you hear something. A lot of compression, when it's done well, is meant to not be heard as an effect. Especially in audio. Working in audio, I always use compression on a lot of stuff in the studio. But the end goal is just to get the compressor to help you out, to make everything sit in a good place in the mix, and then overall mixes are also compressed. But let's talk about compression for guitar. So, why are people suddenly talking about compression? I think people have just been through every other pedal. And compression is, like I said, it can be subtle, it's hard to explain, and therefore people just kind of gravitate toward other pedals. But this pedal mania continues, which is great. I love pedal mania and I love pedals. And so people are getting into compressors. So what's the compressed sound? Well, when we talk about something like the CS2, we're talking about a really good example of that is the introduction to Under the Bridge by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. You may hate them, you may love them, you may not like that song. I don't personally like that song, but that guitar in the intro is a perfect example of what this does when you turn it up too loud or put too much squash on it. But that's a good place to start. We're like, oh, that's what compression sounds like. And then back it off a little. Why do we use it? Well, the Soul Preacher is a good example of that, because what compression can do for a guitarist is enable you to get feedback at a lower volume. It brings up all those little overtones that later become feedback. Those get turned up because, like I said, you take the signal and you squash it, but then the overall thing is kind of small, and then you have to turn it up again, and you get a thicker waveform, thicker musical sound. That will be more prone to getting that wonderful little rock and roll feedback. That's what this is famous for, the Soul Preacher. That's why often compressors are called sustainers, because they turn down the attack of your note, and which also turns up what continues on from your note. So the attack turns down, but the tail of the note gets turned up, and that helps you get that sound. Also, like I said, did I say it? Did I mention the Orange Crush, this really early compressor? That the perfect example of that is Reelin' in the Years by Steely Dan. That super present, without volume change, but really interesting sounding sound. A lot of amps compress anyways. Tube amps add compression. Some amps have compression built into them. Compression is a good way to not get to knock down some loud stuff. That's why compression being used for bass, and we don't have it in stock today. The MXR Studio compressor is a great thing, and I was going to hold it up here as well, but we're sold out, so which is good. That's a compressor that is great for bass players, because bass is always compressed in all forms of music. Just to give it that presence it needs to sit in the mix in the right place. And we come to expect that sound. It's a great sound. Like I said, a lot of bass amps will compress, those classic bass amps that people love, like the SVT and the B15. And you know, even later when people realize, wow, it's really the compression we love, amps came with a compressor built in the later 70s and into the 80s. So the MXR Studio compressor goes for a bunch of money, like $199 or something like that. So it's a tough sell sometimes, but bass players hear it, love it. That compressor works like a studio compressor, like an old DBX, which is a little more subtle than these guitar compressors. These are meant to create that sustain. They're meant to really heavily squash your sound. That's meant to kind of help you ride the sound into that glorious spot. So let me talk about another use for compressors, which is something that you might find as a guitarist, as a bass player, you want a compressor to level out all your notes and make them all just really really glide together well. As a guitarist, you want a compressor to get extra sustain, also to just shave off high points. Acoustic guitar through compression sounds great. All the records you hear with the Beatles and everything, they throw those through limiters, which are a more severe version of compression. Something like this also can, I got a good, someone who really taught me how to use a compressor, a good friend of mine. I'll shout out right now, Ned Chase. Seeing a compressor on his board back in 1990 something. He'd always turn it on for solos. Like a lot of people stomp on their big, they play like a clean air sound and they stomp on something, a big pedal, and they start ripping. Ned always used a slightly distorted signal, I noticed, and when he came to a solo, he stomped on this compressor. And I was like, oh, he's using the makeup volume, because it has this level control here. Because once you turn it on, you start turning stuff down. So it has this thing called makeup volume. And setting that higher than his regular volume. And what it's doing is, it's just sculpting the notes a little bit, but turning the whole thing up. He's already got a distorted signal. He doesn't need to get more distorted by stomping on a stomp box. So I was like, bing! Great idea, and I've used that ever since. So I'll also say, so that's a great use for compression. Using it as an effect is also totally totally a thing. Like I said, that Red Hot Chili Peppers introduction that is famous. Turning up too much, making it sound like your notes are kind of sucking backwards almost, or collapsing like a black hole into itself. As a matter of fact, I think the TC compressor actually has an image of a black hole drawn on the front. So the compressors I'm recommending the most for sustain and good time. What's the word for it? Feedback and rockin' sound. The Soul Preacher. If you want to really sound like an effect, the Boss Compression Sustainer. This is the CS2. I got it in the 90s, so they're probably on the CS5 by now. The MXR Studio compressor, great for bass, great for acoustic guitar, anything you want to be able to really dial in, because that has a settable ratio. Didn't even talk about compression ratios, but there's a lot to talk about here. These have fixed ratios. If you have a ratio level, that's how much it gets turned down versus how much it's crossing that meridian line. Just start with conservative ratios, especially if you don't want to sound really affected. If you want to sound affected, turn your ratio up and it will really start to mess with things. But with the Boss, I'm gesturing like I had it here. We'll have special effects, put that in later. With that, with the MXR Studio compressor, has a settable ratio, very usable. You can use it subtly as well as not so subtly. So that's a big talk about compression. I skipped over a lot of stuff, I'm sure, but hopefully it's been helpful. Check out our other videos here on YouTube, like, share, and all that good stuff that we got to tell you, because just to remind you, it does help. And thank you, and we'll talk to you soon.